Hello and welcome, dear students, to this lecture on meaning and nature of comparative politics. Let's first have a brief look at the objectives of this lecture. In this lecture, we will, number one, try to understand the meaning of the terms comparative and politics. Number two, define the field of comparative politics. Number three, study nature of comparative politics as a discipline. And finally, trace some of the difficulties we may face in the study of comparative politics. Dear students, making comparison is an individual's instinctive tendency, which in fact impels him to appraise his own conduct vis-a-vis his fellow beings. We are always keen to know how others around us live, behave, and act. This comparative interest is also driven by fundamental human urge to discover similarities and dissimilarities between individuals, sets of institutions, regimes, etc. in order to make an informed decision. Comparative politics is one of the results of this basic human urge to compare. Now, before we define the discipline of comparative politics, it's very important to first define what the terms comparative and politics mean. By comparison, one can see patterns of activities undertaken by different regimes, analyze different ideologies, processes, and decision making. It also helps to examine propositions about both the importance of certain characteristics under study and the relationship between sets of data. Comparison allows systematic empirical testing of generalization used to order diverse data. By comparison, one may observe patterns, similarities, and differences. Comparison can be made both across time as well as space. For example, we may study voting behavior or lawmaking processes in a number of countries and analyze the trajectories or patterns. We can also study these phenomena over the dimensions of time. For example, voting behavior in the first general election 1952 in India and 1980 general election, and pinpoint similarities and differences of various natures. Besides, comparison may be made both in terms of entire political systems or of particular processes or institutional activity. Now, coming to term politics, it is defined as continuous, timeless, ever-changing and universal activity having its key manifestation in the making of a decision to face and solve a predicament. It flows from a special kind of activity, a form of human behavior. It refers to the making or taking of a decision in which some political action is involved. In the field of comparative politics, the term politics is used to carry three different connotations: A, political activity; B, political process; and C, political power. Involving some political action, political activity is understood as the effort by which conditions of conflict of interests are created and resolved in a way catering to the interests of the people as far as possible, who also play their part in the struggle for power. If politics means the authoritative allocation of values, as David Easton argues, naturally some form of conflict arises among people regarding these values and also the values upheld by the leaders. These conflicts demand resolution, and the efforts made in this direction is what constitutes political activity. Here comes the role of government, which has to resolve these conflicts by whatever means possible to prevent the breakdown of the political system. Political process is an extension of the sense of political activity. Here, the case of all those agencies which have their role in the decision-making process figures in. The study of politics is thus broadened so as to include even non-state agencies. A study of the way groups and associations operate shows that they are not free from the trends of struggle for power, and they have their own internal mechanisms to deal with their internal conflicts and tensions. What's particularly important for our purpose is that these non-state associations influence the government of the country for the sake of protecting and promoting their specific interests. Finally, political power, being the key concept in the study of politics, is defined as the capacity of affecting the behavior of other person by the threat of some form of sanction. Greater the sanctions or more numerous the sanctions, the greater will be the political power. Politics is thus the exercise of the power of making such decisions. However, politics is also the activity of acquiring and maintaining this power. It's on account of these important connotations that the term politics has come to have its peculiar definition in the realm of comparative politics. Here, politics has been made free from the shackles of normative dimensions and restated in empirical terms. The result is that it is not merely a study of state and the government, but it is also a study of the exercise of power. It is therefore related to both the conflict and competition for power and its use. Who makes political decisions? How did they acquire the power to make them? Where does the authority to make such decisions come from? What decisions have been taken, why and how do they affect the life of the society? These are some of the questions that comparative politics seeks to answer. Now, let's come to the issue of defining comparative politics. Comparative politics is one of the three main subfields of political science, together with political theory and international relations. Whereas political theory deals with normative and theoretical questions about equality, democracy, justice, etc., comparative politics deals with empirical questions. The concern of comparative politics is not primarily whether participation is good or bad, but rather the investigation of which forms of participation people choose to use, or say why young people use more unconventional forms than the older age groups, and whether there are differences in how much groups participate. Even though comparative political scientists are also concerned with normative questions, the discipline as such is empirical and value neutral. On the other hand, whereas international relations deals with interactions between political systems or with the questions like balance of power, trade, war, etc., comparative politics deals with interactions within political systems. Comparative politics does not analyze wars between nations, but rather investigates which party is in government and why it has decided in favor of military intervention, or what kind of electoral constituency has supported this party, or how strong the influence of army industry has been, and so on. As a subject matter, it is concerned with power relationships between individuals, groups, and organizations, classes, and institutions within the political system. Comparative politics does not ignore external influences on the internal structures, but its ultimate concern is power configurations within systems. Many argue that because of globalization and increasing interdependence between countries, comparative politics and international relations converge towards one single discipline. Be that as it may be, what's important for us is to understand that comparative politics is a discipline that deals with the very essence of politics where sovereignty rests, that is, the state. Being a vast and variegated discipline, comparative politics constitutes a core discipline of political science, and as Peter Hall has asserted, no respectable department of political science would be without scholars of comparative politics. It may be noted that comparative politics is concerned with behavior, institutions, processes, ideas, and values present in more than one country. It searches for those regularities and patterns, those similarities and differences between different nation states that can help clarify the basic nature, working and beliefs of regimes. It studies broader range of political activity, including governments and their institutions, as well as other forms of organizations not directly related to national government, for example, the tribal communities, associations, unions, etc. While comparative politics originated from the way in which the empirical investigation of the question, how does politics work, is carried out, it includes three traditions. The first tradition is the study of single countries. This reflects the understanding of comparative politics in its formative years in the US, where it mainly meant the study of political systems outside the US, often in isolation from one another and involving little comparison. Today, many courses on comparative politics still include, say for example, German politics, Spanish politics, and so on. And many textbooks are structured with country-specific chapters. The second tradition is methodological and is concerned with establishing rules and standards of comparative analysis. This tradition addresses the question of how comparative analysis should be carried out in order to enhance their potential for the descriptive accumulation of comparable information, causal explanations, and association between key variables and prediction. This trend is concerned with rigorous conceptual, logical, and statistical techniques of analysis, also involving issue of measurement and case selection. The third tradition of comparative politics is analytical, in that it combines empirical substance and method. The body of literature in this tradition is primarily concerned with the identification and explanation of differences and similarities between countries and their institutions, actors, and processes through systematic comparisons. Like all scientific disciplines, comparative politics is a combination of substance, that is, the study of political institutions, actors, and processes, and method, that is, identifying and explaining differences and similarities following established rules and standard of analysis. And like all sciences, comparative politics aims to say something general about the world. For example, formulate generalizations beyond one or few cases. Now, dear students, what does comparative politics do in practice? Now, there are three main concerns of comparative politics in its practice. One, to compare means that similarities and differences are described. Comparative politics describes the world and builds on these descriptions, establishes classifications and typologies. For example, we classify different types of electoral systems. Secondly, similarities and differences are explained. For example, why did social revolutions take place in France and Russia but not in Germany and Japan? Why is there no socialist party in US? Why is electoral turnout in US and Switzerland lower than in most other democracies? As in all scientific disciplines, we formulate hypotheses to explain these differences and use empirical data to test them to check whether or not the hypothesis holds true in reality. It is through this method that causality can be inferred, generalizations can be produced, and theories improved. Finally, comparative politics aims to formulate predictions. For example, if we know that proportional representation electoral system favor the proliferation of parties in the legislature, could we have predicted that the change of electoral law in New Zealand in 1996 from first past the post to proportional representation would lead to a more fragmented party system? Now, Dear students, let us look into the nature of comparative politics as a discipline. In order to understand the nature of discipline, or to say what sort of subject comparative politics is, it is very important to examine the characteristics of this discipline as developed in its contemporary phase. Some of the major characteristics that would be very helpful in understanding the nature of comparative politics are: number one, comparative politics as a discipline is analytical as well as empirical investigation. The analytical cum empirical method adopted by writers belonging to the latest phase has definitely enlarged the field of our inquiry. Frederick Eckenstein says that in the realm of comparative government, more and more writers turned from a concern for evaluation of governmental forms to a pure description. By and large, they retained the analytical categories developed by their predecessors, but began to shape their meanings to fit descriptive rather than normative purpose. Second, comparative politics is more than the study of infrastructure. The study of comparative politics is not confined to the formal structures of government, as was the trend with the traditional political scientists. Here, a student is concerned with inquiry into matters of public concern, with the behavior and the acts that may concern a society as a totality. Instead of remaining concerned with the formal structures of government alone, a student of comparative politics has to be concerned with crystallized patterns of behavior and with practices, since these are the parts of living structures of a government. If instead of government, the term political system is used, naturally it becomes a part of the entire social system, and the input-output process includes all those forces of environment that have their effect on the decision-making process. Thus, the role of political parties and pressure groups, for example, becomes as significant as the role of legislature and executive in the study of modern political systems. Third, comparative politics lays emphasis on the study of developing societies. What has added more to the significance of the study of comparative politics is the emphasis of more and more writers on the politics of developing areas. It has occurred as a result of the realization that the subject of comparative politics must include all governments along with their infrastructures that exist in the contemporary world, and wherever possible, references to the governments throughout time. The study of comparative government is no longer a study of selected European or American governments. Rather, it is as much a study of developed Western governments as those of developing political systems of the developing countries of Afro-Asian, Latin American world. More and more attention is being paid to the study of politics of developing societies, both for the reason of making this subject of universal study and for building theories and models, so that the system of democracy prevailing in these countries could be saved from being subverted by the forces opposed to it. Fourth, comparative politics focuses on interdisciplinary approach. What has really enriched the field of comparative politics and at the same time made it a complex subject is the focus on interdisciplinary study. Writers have made more and more use of tools that they have borrowed from the disciplines of sociology, psychology, economics, anthropology, and even from natural sciences like biology. For instance, systems analysis with its two derivatives in the form of structural functional and input-output approaches owes its origin to the discipline of biology that has been borrowed by the leading American political scientists like David Easton from sociologists like Robert Martin and Talcott Parsons. The result is that comparative politics has come to have much that makes it look like political sociology and political psychology. a study of new topics like political development, political modernization, political socialization, political acculturation, political change, political leadership and the like makes it seem like application of sociological and psychological analysis to the study of the behavior of government and other political structures. Fifth, comparative politics essentially focuses on value-free political science. And finally, to a great extent, the subject of political science has lost its normative aspect and assumed empirical dimensions in the sphere of comparative politics. Dear students, the result is that value-free political theory has replaced value-laden political theory. The concern of the students of comparative politics is not with the things as they ought to be in their ideal forms. Instead, it is with what they are. There is hardly any place for the rules of history or ethics in the subject of comparative politics, as the entire field has been covered by the rules of sociology, psychology and economics. There is thus hardly any place for a man like Leo Strauss in the field of comparative politics, who, while sticking to the traditions of Plato and Aristotle, contends that political theory cannot eschew values and thus a value-free political science is impossible. It should, however, be made clear that the use of term values by David Easton when he defines politics as the authoritative allocation of values, or of value system by Gabriel Almond when he identifies it with a system of ideas and beliefs, has an empirical and not a normative connotation. We may say that the term value is used by the writers of comparative politics in the sense of a price or worth that a thing gets after it is recognized by the policy makers. There is no value in a thing unless it is allocated by those who are in authority. Now, we will look at some of the challenges in the study of comparative politics. Dear students, there are some issues and challenges in the study of discipline of comparative politics. Firstly, the difficulty is in collecting information and getting data about individual governments, because sometimes revealing the facts and figures is simply forbidden by the country or countries under study. Specifically, information in the totalitarian countries is very meager, but it does not mean that these countries are totally closed to investigation. There could be ways and means to gather information, but it is very difficult. For example, a careful study of the members of government over a time is revealing in many ways, like it can be known whether the government is stable or unstable, what kind of leaders are leading the country, and also what are the various factions, if any, that exist in the ruling groups. On the contrary, information gathering in democratic countries is easy, as information can be gathered from multiple sources, including the government itself. But even in democratic country, full information may not be available. Many facts are not given by these countries on the pretext of public interest, especially those dealing with the security of the country or defense or foreign affairs. Secondly, problems arise out of the background variables. The background variables create some problems for the study of comparative governments. In every country, the pattern of thinking and acting of the masses as well as of those who are in power depends on different factors known as variables. These variables range from economic conditions to the climate of a country, or its geographical conditions, or certain historical happenings. These variables have a complex influence on the politics of a country. Analyzing and measuring these variables accurately is a difficult task. Thirdly, there are problems as a result of the role of norms, institutions, and governmental behavior. Nearly all the countries have the government of their own choice. They decide in advance what type or form of government they should have. This decision to have a particular type of government introduces the element of value or norm in the governmental system. It is also decided as to what government should do and how it should do. In other words, we have to see whether the norms corresponds to the behavior. The question of the relationship between norms and behavior is complex. Thus, for the study of comparative governments, it is essential to look into the relationship of norms with the institutions and with the behavior. However, the relationship between these three elements is not simple. So, dear students, to conclude, comparative politics is one of the three main subfields of political science along with political theory and international relations, focusing on internal political structures, actors and processes, and analyzing them empirically by describing, explaining and predicting their variety, whether these are similarities or differences across political systems and over time. These could be national political systems, regional, municipal or even supranational systems. Like all scientific disciplines, comparative politics is a combination of substance, that is, the study of political institutions, actors, processes, as well as of method, which implies identifying and explaining differences and similarities following established rules and standard of analysis. And finally, like all sciences, comparative politics aims to say something general about the world, that is, to formulate generalizations beyond one or few cases. With these words, we conclude today's lecture. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.